So picture this. It is 6:00 p.m. on a Tuesday. You are standing in your kitchen.
Right, the classic danger zone.
Exactly. And, you are a smart, goal-oriented person. You care about your health, your relationships, all the promises you make to yourself. But in this exact moment, your brain has basically given you temporary amnesia about all of that. It has deliberately wiped everything you value just to make you, open that refrigerator and reach for a drink.
It feels like a total betrayal by your own mind.
It really does. But you haven't suddenly lost your morals. You are literally experiencing a biological hijacking. So, welcome to today's deep dive. We are looking at the exact mechanical moment a habit takes over your brain and the surprisingly simple physical button you can press to stop it.
Yeah, we are really dissecting the architecture of the urge today. And to do that, we're leaning on some incredibly practical source material. It isn't theoretical neuroscience written in a sterile lab. It's actually authored by Susan, who has been sober for over 25 years. So she outlines the ground-level mechanics of what actually works to break an ingrained loop in the real world.
Okay, let's unpack this because Susan's approach completely discards that whole traditional narrative of just, white-knuckling through your cravings.
Right. The clenched jaw, the sheer force of willpower.
Yeah, that exhausting battle. She argues that fighting the urge like that is just a fundamental misunderstanding of what an urge actually is. So today we are taking a purely analytical look. We aren't getting into the morality of drinking or, the societal shame around heavy habits. We're basically debugging a behavioral system.
I like that framing. And to debug that system, we first really need to understand the operating system's default settings.
Right.
Susan points out a phenomenon that, honestly, anyone with any kind of habit will instantly recognize. The moment the urge hits, it feels incredibly immediate and overwhelmingly real.
Oh, absolutely.
You might have woken up at, say, 7 a.m., feeling deeply, totally committed to abstaining.
Feeling like a superhero.
Exactly. But by 6:00 p.m., the cognitive landscape completely shifts. The idea of drinking doesn't just feel appealing. Dismissing the idea feels functionally impossible.
Yeah, the source material describes this as a narrowing of the brain's focus. It's almost as if your brain just slaps blinders on you.
That's a great way to picture it.
Think of a horse navigating down a super chaotic city street. The blinders ensure it only looks straight ahead at the immediate path, totally ignoring all peripheral information.
Right. The noise, the traffic, it all gets blocked out.
Exactly. So at 6 p.m., your brain puts those blinders on, and your peripheral information, which, just so happens to be your long-term goals, your health, your desire to get a good night's sleep, all of that suddenly vanishes.
Poof. Gone.
But wait, so is the brain essentially tricking you into temporary amnesia about your own goals just to, follow the path of least resistance?
What's fascinating here is that your blinders analogy perfectly describes the outcome. But the brain's intent isn't actually a malicious trick.
It's not trying to sabotage me.
No. It is simply biology executing its absolute prime directive, which is energy conservation.
Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah, so throughout the day, you navigate all these complex decisions using your prefrontal cortex. That's the brain's executive control center.
The logic board.
Exactly. It handles logic, long-term planning, willpower. But the prefrontal cortex is a massive, massive energy drain. By the end of a long day, or when you hit emotional discomfort like stress, the brain just wants to offload that cognitive processing.
So it just hands the steering wheel over to a more efficient system?
Precisely. It hands control to the basal ganglia, which is the region responsible for automated routines and habits. And the basal ganglia, it does not care about your 5-year plan.
It has zero interest in your fitness goals.
Zero. It only cares about efficiency. So over months or years of a routine, say pouring a glass of wine to transition from work mode to evening mode, you have essentially paved a frictionless neural highway.
A superhighway straight to the fridge.
Right. So at 6:00 p.m., that quiet pull toward a drink isn't really a deliberate decision you're making. It is just the basal ganglia identifying a complex emotional state like fatigue or stress and running a highly efficient automated script to resolve it.
Because contemplating your health metrics takes heavy cognitive effort.
Yes, whereas grabbing a glass is an automated zero-effort routine. It narrows your focus to save energy.
Okay, so if the prefrontal cortex is basically a drained battery by the evening, and the basal ganglia has completely hijacked our focus, relying on raw willpower is just a mathematical impossibility.
It's a losing game from the start.
Right. You are trying to outthink a biological system that has actively shut down your long-term thinking apparatus. The engine that powers your restraint is totally offline.
Exactly. So you can't fight it with logic.
So we need a backdoor into the nervous system. Let's look at the immediate intervention. Susan advises that when your hand is literally reaching for the refrigerator door, the most effective response is not to fight the craving.
Right. Because fighting the craving requires the prefrontal cortex, which we've just established, is totally depleted.
It's empty.
Plus, engaging in this mental wrestling match with the urge, it actually feeds attention and energy right back into the loop.
Oh, wow. I didn't think about that.
Yeah, so Susan recommends a radically different approach. You acknowledge the momentum of the moment, and you deploy a specific physical pattern interrupt. She suggests pressing a thumb or a finger firmly into the palm of your opposite hand.
Okay, I have to ask, because this sounds a lot like those old behavioral tricks, like snapping a rubber band on your wrist to punish a thought, or just giving yourself a cheap distraction to look at until the craving passes.
I get why it sounds like that, but it is fundamentally the opposite of a distraction trick.
Okay, how so?
Distraction implies you are just trying to look away and somehow wait out the storm. Pressing your thumb into your palm is an active sensory shift. Let's look at the neurology here for a second.
Sure.
When your brain is running that automated script toward the refrigerator, it is essentially operating on autopilot. By pressing your thumb firmly into your palm, you force your somatosensory cortex, that's the part of the brain that processes tactile information, to suddenly light up.
Ah, so you are introducing an unexpected data point into a closed loop.
Exactly. You are speaking to the brain in its own immediate physical language, rather than trying to reason with it abstractly. The brain is forced to allocate processing power away from the craving loop just to assess this brand new physical sensation in your hand.
It's like throwing a giant speed bump onto that paved neural highway. It doesn't permanently stop the car, but it forces the system to hit the brakes and jostles the suspension just long enough for you to grab the steering wheel again.
That is a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
And that speed bump buys you a really crucial window. Susan notes that this physical interrupt creates perhaps 3 to 5 seconds of space between the automated urge and your physical reaction.
3 to 5 seconds.
Yes. Without the thumb press, the urge directly equals the action. The space between the two is 0.
Just instant reaction.
Yeah. But by forcing the brain to process new tactile data, you pry open a 3-second window where the prefrontal cortex can briefly reboot. You get a moment where a conscious choice is biologically possible again.
Okay, so we have our 3 seconds of clarity. We've thrown the speed bump on the highway and slowed the momentum.
Yep.
But standing in the kitchen, 3 seconds is not very long. The basal ganglia is definitely going to recover quickly and try to get that car back up to speed.
Oh, it'll absolutely try.
So once you let go of your palm, you need something to hold you in that state of clarity. You need like a cognitive anchor.
Yes, the physical interrupt gives you the pause, but you must fill that pause with a specific mental framework before the automated habit reasserts control. And Susan shares the exact psychological tools she's relied on to maintain over 25 years of sobriety. She utilizes a concept called a somatic marker.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the way she employs this completely flips how we usually think about consequences.
It does.
For Susan, using a somatic marker means deliberately recalling a highly specific, visceral, and just deeply unpleasant memory related to drinking. It's not just an intellectual reminder that drinking is bad. It's an active recall of everything after the first drink.
And to understand why this works, we really have to look at how the brain anticipates rewards.
Okay, let's get into it.
The urge to drink is driven by a dopamine spike. But dopamine isn't actually about pleasure itself, it's about the anticipation of pleasure.
Wait, really? Just the anticipation?
Yeah. The brain remembers the initial relief of the first sip and projects that relief into the present moment. A somatic marker dismantles that anticipation.
It's like, okay, imagine walking up to the hostess stand of an incredibly atmospheric restaurant and you are absolutely starving.
Oh, I know that feeling.
You smell the fresh bread, you see the low lighting, your brain is just spiking with anticipation of a great meal. But right before you ask for a table, you pull out your phone and read a dozen vivid 1-star reviews from people who contracted aggressive food poisoning there the night before.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that would do it.
Right. Suddenly, the smell of the bread doesn't trigger hunger at all. It triggers a mild wave of nausea.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this physiological reaction illustrates exactly why a somatic marker defeats raw willpower every single time.
Because it's a bodily reaction.
Exactly.
Huh.
Willpower tries to fight the smell of the bread with abstract logic. It says, I shouldn't eat here because it doesn't align with my nutritional goals.
Which never works when you're hungry.
Never. That argument holds no weight against an immediate sensory craving. But a somatic marker uses the brain's own visceral data right against it.
So when Susan recalls her somatic marker, perhaps the crushing fatigue, the racing heart of a 3.0 a.m. hangover, the anxiety of a forgotten conversation, she isn't just picturing it in her mind, she's actively forcing her nervous system to re-experience it.
She's essentially microdosing the hangover.
Microdosing the hangover, that is such a powerful way to put it.
By recalling the memory with high emotional and physical fidelity, she temporarily floods her system with the physiological discomfort of the aftermath.
And that actively poisons the dopamine spike.
Yes. The brain can no longer anticipate a pure reward because it is suddenly processing the physical sensation of the consequence. You break the illusion that the habit is going to bring relief, not through logic, but through contradictory sensory evidence.
And the source material highlights a critical preparatory step here. Susan actually teaches a course called 66 Days to Break the Nightly Drinking Habit, where a core component is establishing these somatic markers in advance.
That is so important.
Because you cannot invent a vivid physiological memory on the fly while your hand is literally on the fridge handle.
No, your brain is too compromised in that moment.
Right. You have to have your one-star reviews pre-written and readily accessible. When you use the thumb trick to buy your 3 seconds, you use that time to immediately load the somatic marker and neutralize the craving.
It really is a precise two-step mechanical operation. Step 1, the physical tactile interrupt to disrupt the basal ganglia. Step 2, the physiological recall of the aftermath to neutralize the dopamine anticipation.
And together they shift you out of the automated loop.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've laid out the mechanics of a successful intervention, but we definitely have to address system failure.
Because it happens.
Humans are not flawless machines, and habits that have been entrenched for years possess immense gravitational pull. What happens when the urge actually wins?
Right.
Let's say it's been an extraordinarily draining day, you skip the thumb trick, you ignore the somatic marker, and you just pour the drink. Traditional recovery narratives usually frame this moment as a catastrophic failure, initiating this massive spiral of guilt.
They do, yeah. But the guide offers a radically pragmatic approach to this scenario. Susan explicitly argues that if you slip and consume a drink, it does not erase your progress.
It doesn't set you back to zero.
No, it doesn't set your knowledge back to zero at all. It simply means the pattern wasn't broken in that specific instance.
So what does this all mean? If a slip is merely categorized as an unbroken pattern rather than a massive moral failure, doesn't that strip the shame entirely out of the equation?
This raises an important question about how our societal views on habit change actually perpetuate the habits themselves.
Oh, that's deep. How so?
Well, we have been conditioned to view a relapse as a deep flaw in character.
Yeah.
But let's look at the neurology of shame for a second. Shame is a highly distressing emotional state. It causes acute psychological pain.
Right.
And what does the brain do when it encounters acute pain?
It immediately seeks a highly efficient, automated routine to soothe that discomfort.
Exactly. It seeks the habit. The guilt spiral literally fuels the exact mechanism that drives the drinking. The shame makes you feel terrible, which tells the basal ganglia it needs to run a soothing routine, which leads to another drink, which just creates more shame.
It's a closed loop of misery.
It is. So by removing the moral judgment, Susan cuts the fuel line to that cycle.
It essentially transforms a relapse from a character judgment into a simple data entry problem.
I love that. A data entry problem.
Yeah. If a systems engineer runs a program and it crashes, they don't sit on the floor and cry about being a bad person. They just look at the logs.
They debug the system. You look at the evening objectively and ask, the pattern remained intact tonight. Where did the sequence fail?
Did I fail to use the physical interrupt?
Right. Or was my somatic marker too vague to actually counter the dopamine spike? You analyze the failure, you refine your physiological anchor, and you just apply the updated protocol the next day.
And the text emphasizes that treating slips as data rather than disasters is what actually leads to long-term reprogramming. The urge isn't some enemy to be feared. The urge is the specific testing environment where the new code is applied.
Yes. Every time you successfully execute the interrupt and deploy the somatic marker, you are weakening that neural highway.
You are literally rewiring your own hardware through repetition, turning the automated loop into a dusty, unused road.
You transition from being a passive passenger in a vehicle driven by your basal ganglia to an active engineer of your own behavioral programming.
That is incredibly empowering. Let's distill this deep dive into the core mechanics for you to take away today. Your habits are not a sign of weak character. They are a sign of an overly efficient neurological filing system.
Exactly.
When the urge hits, your prefrontal cortex is offline. Do not attempt to use willpower to fight it. Instead, press your thumb firmly into your palm to throw a tactile speed bump onto the neural pathway.
Buy yourself those 3 seconds.
Yes, use the 3 seconds that buys you to deploy your somatic marker. Microdose the physical memory of the aftermath to neutralize the anticipation of the reward. And if the system crashes and you slip,
Debug it.
debug it. Analyze the data without shame, adjust your variables, and try again tomorrow.
I want to leave you with a final thought to examine because the architecture of the urge we've mapped out today applies universally.
Right. It's not just about one thing.
No, we focused extensively on the habit of drinking. But consider this. What other seemingly unbreakable behaviors in your own life, perhaps mindlessly doom-scrolling on your phone for 2 hours before bed, or instantly snapping defensively at a partner when you feel criticized, are actually just narrow-focus, automated basal ganglia loops?
That is a great question.
What would happen if, tomorrow, you applied the physical thumb press and a visceral somatic marker to that specific urge?
I think the results would be pretty amazing. You are not broken. You don't have a fractured character requiring some emotional cast. You are managing a living, breathing behavioral system. And systems can be rewritten once you know exactly where to insert the new code.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive today. Keep analyzing your own programming. Keep experimenting with that physical pause. And we'll catch you next time.